the advice that I always say is don't wait for an invitation, make an invitation. Because that is the thing that I had to learn. That was the lesson that I had to learn. And when I finally learned it, I learned it about the same time that I was recording my first CD, that I needed to invite people to be a part of that process. And when I did that, all of a sudden, amazing things started to happen. Amazing opportunities started to show up.
Hey, friend, welcome back to the Mindful Evolution Podcast. I am here today with a fantastic human being, yet another, that I met at the recent podcast conference that I attended called Podcast Movement. And today I have the lovely Franklin Taggart on the show. Franklin is a career, business, and life coach for people who want creativity to be the cornerstone of everything that they do in their lives so that they can truly follow their dreams. And Franklin is also an experienced blogger and podcast host. And so super excited to have him here with me today. Franklin, thanks for joining me.
Leah, I'm just delighted to see you again, and thanks for the invitation.
It's my pleasure. Every time I'm in a space with you, I just feel my energy light up, and it's really wonderful because I just want always more people like that in my life. So thank you for being here.
The feeling is mutual.
Oh, lovely. Thank you. Thank you. So, Franklin, I know that one of the things you and I share and have in common is the entrepreneurial lifestyle that we have chosen to opt into. And this is actually a conversation that's come up a couple of times this week. But one of the things that I would love to hear about from you is how entrepreneurship has been a spiritual path for you in this lifetime.
Wow, that's a fun question to think about. I've been an entrepreneur off and on. Kind of, I can't think of a time when I wasn't. Maybe when I was in high school, I wasn't really an entrepreneur. But when I got to college, all of a sudden there were all of these different kind of gigs that I would do on the side that were just mostly just because they were interesting and they were fun. Like I started my first recording studio when I was still in college, and I started doing production work in college, and I started a publishing company when I was in college. And I just kept doing all of these things because they were interesting and they were fun. And I don't know, after I graduated, I didn't have a real clear plan for my future. I knew that I wanted music to be the center of it, but I didn't, I had graduated with a degree in music and business, and I had no idea, first of all, what career I wanted or how to have a career. So it was like my real education started after I graduated. And so the thing that was really interesting was that I had a bunch of day jobs. Like I was in social services, I was in sales, and it seemed like to me that I was just changing jobs every year or so. I would, kind of learn it, get the ropes down, get as far as I could with it, and then I would get bored. And I would just, move on to something else. And that went on for a solid 10 years after I graduated from college. I think I had 12 or 13 jobs in between college and 10 years later. And at that point, I had started to get kind of burned out. I had been in social services for about 7 years at that point. And at that time, I was working in a crisis center. And I was just as much in crisis as the people that I was talking to. And so I said, I'm starting to realize that the traditional job track, the career track that is kind of prescribed, especially in America, of, get the 9 to 5, work 10 hours overtime a week, have a family, do all of that great stuff, and then kind of wait around until you retire. I realized that that wasn't going to be my path, but I didn't know what my path was going to be. I had a friend at that time that was a consultant, and he recognized something in me that I didn't really know, and that he said, you could be a really good consultant. And I said, well, I had never even thought about that as a possibility, but I'd love to try it. So he gave me some opportunities early on. And in 1997, I left my last full-time job and started consulting on one side and started full-time music on the other. So I was doing the consulting work just as I could, and then really devoting my time to music full-time, which I started to realize was an entrepreneurial path.
What was that
And
transition like for you, going from like being full into a full-time job to all of a sudden like stepping into all this newness?
it's the most thrilling and terrifying thing that I've ever done over and over and over again in my life. It's like being on a perpetual roller coaster, and you don't have to wait in line.
I fully resonate with that. It's just like the speed pass, like you're just right in the front,
Yeah, yeah, front seat all the time.
front and
Um,
center.
so it was a tricky path for me, and I didn't do well in the beginning. I remember I had moved to Nashville because I really wanted to give professional songwriting a solid try, because it was a talent that I had that I really loved. And I got to Nashville, and I call Nashville my graduate school experience, because that was where I really learned about what it takes to be successful in music, and how successful people were putting together, you know, a good career in music. I also found that Nashville wasn't a great place for me to be, um, which was a hard lesson. But one of the things that happened when I lived in Nashville, there were two things that happened there that were kind of really bellwether moments. One of them was that I ended up having to take a job installing carpet to just pay the rent. And that was the hardest work I've ever done for any length of time. And it was so dirty and nasty. And I tell the story, I actually wrote a song about it. And it was the carpet company that I was working for got hired to install carpet in a Motel 6 in the height of summer. And this would have been, I think, the summer of 1997. And in that summer, they had the most 100-degree plus days, like in the history of Nashville. The motel where we were working didn't have air conditioning. I mean, they didn't even have electricity because they were closed. They were getting remodeled, so the place was closed. There was a pack of wild dogs that was running around, so we had to keep the doors locked and we had to keep the windows latched, because the dogs could get through a partially open screen in a window, and they were dangerous. I mean, they were crazy, you know. And so whenever you would go out of the room to go down and get another roll of carpet, you had to make sure that the dogs weren't there, right? And there was one day in particular, there was a tornado warning going on. It was 105 degrees outside, and inside the motel room, it had to have been 120 degrees. And I was just dusty and dirty and nasty and gross. And the rest of the crew left to go get lunch or something like that. And I had brought my own lunch that day, and I kneeled down in the middle of that motel room and sobbed. And I just said, if this is what my life is going to be, I can't go here. I think there's a point where you have to reach a bottom before you're willing to entertain possibilities that you wouldn't have otherwise considered. And for me, what happened was that I had to reach that point in order to be open to going other places. And for me, the door that opened was in Washington, D.C. Oh, I need to do the other bellwether moment. The other bellwether moment happened kind of in conjunction with that day in the motel room. I was a Christian at the time. And there's a long story there, but I don't want to go into it. But I remember praying, God, I want to be a man of faith. Whatever that means, I just want to be a person of faith. I didn't know what I was asking for, but basically what ended up happening over the next few years was that everything that I leaned on as a spiritual crutch or as a spiritual bypass got kicked out from under me. And there was nothing left. That included the church, that included my understanding of the Bible, that included all of the fellowship that I had been a part of, that included all of these different things. Everything that I had ever leaned on as some kind of a spiritual crutch was just taken away. Right? Getting back to the story at hand, one of the things that happened not long after that experience in the motel room, and not long after praying that prayer, was I got invited to go to Washington, D.C. for a weekend. I had met a person online. We were, trading a lot of information. She was a part of the dance and music crowd in D.C., and she said, you just need to come up here and see what's happening. So I went up there the weekend. I think it was Valentine's Day, 1998. I went up for the weekend. And in that weekend, I was offered a job at a music store. I was offered 2 opportunities to be a lead guitar player for other songwriters. I was given, I got to attend like 2 or 3 big music events that were really, really resonant for me. And I was invited to come up there and live rent-free in exchange for my carpentry skills in remodeling a basement in the house that I was living in. So one of the things that I saw there was that there was such a stark opening of a door that wasn't opening in Nashville. In fact, all of the doors in Nashville that I was trying to kick down closed fast in front of me. And that was really a time in my life. That was one of the first times in my life where I had a tangible experience of surrender. And that surrender led to the open door in Washington, D.C. And that's where I met my wife, and that's where we had children, and that's where my music career was able to actually happen full time. And it was just like, okay, that was amazing. But the thing that I've come to see is that my journey in entrepreneurship has been my spiritual path. That has been the place where my lessons have been learned, and that has been the place where the person that I thought I was has been the most deconstructed and reconstructed. And all of those things are a part of that process. So that's the long story.
Thank you for sharing that.
Yeah.
Yeah, one of the things that I'm hearing is this this constant transformation. You brought up the roller coaster earlier, right? This up and down. And at the very beginning you talked about how these things that you thought you wanted to do really didn't end up being what you actually wanted to do, and what actually was right resonant for you. And I think that you hit the nail on the head there with this concept of entrepreneurship as a path, a spiritual path, truly. Because I think a lot of people get into this world of entrepreneurism and they're like, oh, I think I want to do this. And then in actuality, the thing that they're actually ending up doing that they're like, oh, this feels really good, is really usually nothing that they think it's going to look like going into it.
Yeah.
And that's part of the path of spirituality, is recognizing what it means to fully surrender all of your expectations and step into messy action, trying something, trying that hat on, seeing how it feels, seeing how it resonates. Is it in alignment? And then also, like you're saying, is it bringing you an abundance of experiences that feel good? because you went to Nashville thinking that it was what was going to feel good for you and that's where you were going to have all the opportunity come to you. And in reality, it wasn't until you opened that door into DC that you were like, oh, wow, actually, that is not it.
Yeah. Yeah, but you couldn't have told me that even 2 days before I went to DC. You couldn't have told me that, and I wouldn't have believed you. I wouldn't have believed anyone telling me that there was somewhere else that I was supposed to be.
Yeah, you have to experience it, right? And just like
Yeah.
you were talking about earlier, sometimes you got to hit that ground zero before you actually realize what it feels like to be on the other side of it.
I thought I just had to pay my dues and everything would be fine. That wasn't the case.
You put out that prayer, though.
Yeah, doggone it.
Yeah, you put that
Take that
intention
one
right
back.
out into the world. So I hear that throughout your journey, you have listened. You have stepped into these things that you thought might be the way to feel them out and to try that experience on and notice how it feels and how it influences your life. And again, I think this is a really important aspect of being an entrepreneur is being willing to step outside the comfort zone, step outside the box, and step into maybe the things that feel really challenging for you.
Mm-hmm.
And, in from my own experience as an entrepreneur, I have found that this journey has been one of the greatest mirrors for me to really look at myself and, in a big part, see a lot of my shadows.
Mm-hmm.
And that also has supported me, as you're saying, along this spiritual path. But I'm curious, what exactly does this is this? What exactly does it mean to have this mirror to look through the entrepreneurial lens to look at your shadows? And what does that do for us?
Well, there's a lot of complexity to that question, and yet the answer is probably pretty simple. I think that entrepreneurship is an opportunity for self-inquiry on a level that other things don't offer, other tracks don't offer. The only other place that I've found the same level of self-inquiry, other than through spiritual practice, has been in creating art. Because I think that we go to the depths of ourselves when we create real art in ways that we don't any other time, right? So the thing that I would say is that I think that one of the reasons that entrepreneurship and artistry and creativity are all vessels for self-inquiry is because all of the ways that we're intimidated by the world or intimidated by something that we need to do, or all of the ways that we're faced with our own limitations and our own difficulties, they're right in your face. You can't escape them. It's like right here all the time, right? And ultimately, I think you just there's a level of honesty that's required. And honestly, I didn't reach that level of honesty immediately. I was in denial about all of my strengths and weaknesses and challenges and all of that stuff. I was in total denial about all of that stuff for years. And I just tried to pretend like it wasn't no big thing. But it was a big thing, and it was keeping me from actually getting things done that needed to be done. Some examples, like I've always been kind of a timid person. And I remember in college feeling like I was a good guitar player, I was a good musician, but yet I was never invited to play with other people. And I never figured out why. And I never asserted myself to see what was going on and to see if I could play with them. I just kind of accepted the fact that nobody wanted me to play with them, so I just had to get really good at being a soloist, right? And that went on for a long time. But the thing that I never wanted to address was my own timidity, my own inability to put myself forward and say, I'd love to play with you, you know. And so one of the important lessons, whenever I get asked that icebreaker question of what advice would you give your younger self, the advice that I always say is don't wait for an invitation, make an invitation, because that is the thing that I had to learn. That was the lesson that I had to learn. And when I finally learned it, I learned it about the same time that I was recording my first CD, that I needed to invite people to be a part of that process. And when I did that, all of a sudden, amazing things started to happen. Amazing opportunities started to show up. That one lesson wasn't an easy lesson to learn. And I remember being pretty intimidated when I started making those calls. But they all said yes. And if they said no, they usually had a good reason. So this thing that I had made up in my head about, I had made this reality in my head so terrifying and so scary, ended up having no teeth at all, right? And so I just kept coming up against lesson after lesson after lesson like that, where the places where I was passive they were being challenged. I couldn't be passive and be an entrepreneur. I could not be passive. And, no matter how much they tell you that income can be passive, there's no such thing. There's a level of activity to generating revenue that requires you to get off the sofa and do something, So the other area where I remember, and I still, in some ways, I still have to consciously overcome this tendency, and that is when I'm offering something, it's not my first inclination to openly promote it. And I don't have a reason for that, but it's been a pattern for as long as I've been trying to promote things that, I forgot. I've got a gig tonight and I haven't promoted it at all. Nobody's going to show up, and nobody did show up. So it's like, as a musician, that's the death of a career if people don't show up and people don't. So I had to really work hard to develop a tendency of promoting the gigs that I was playing. I had to overcome the idea that my music gigs were about me, and I had to start to understand that they were really about my audience's experience. And when I learned that lesson, things changed tremendously. But as long as I made my gigs about me, it was an invitation to suffering, So all of those kinds of things just kept coming up over and over and over again. It is a shiny mirror, and you will get to know yourself in ways. I think the biggest thing that I learned, and I still do a lot of work around this, is that there's a tendency that we have that we need to present ourselves. We need to create a persona that is, that is socially acceptable, or that is more appealing than how we are truly. And that persona is just like, it's just a tinker toy full of lies. One tinker toy after another, and each one of those tinker toys is a little bit of a lie about myself. So one of the things that I've been going through over the last probably 3 to 4 years is a deconstruction of all of those personas that I've created about who I am in the world. It's been painful to see, and it's been painful to go through, but it's been necessary, because working out of integrity leads to burnout. It's the first class ticket to burnout. And I was starting to feel that.
Yeah, I'm hearing that more recently, you've still continued to look at this mirror that the entrepreneurial path has held in front of you to continue to look deeper at yourself and continue to shed the layers that don't feel good and that aren't in alignment with you and that aren't actually like your truest, deepest self in outward expression.
Yeah.
And I know for me, that's been one of the most powerful parts of this journey as an entrepreneur is like, who really am I? What am I really here to do? And why am I here to do it? And how can I do it in a way that feels good for me? And it is easy to step into this world and avoid the mirror.
Yeah.
It's very easy to do because it's hard work. Like it's not easy to look at yourself and be like, actually, like I'm not good at that.
Yeah.
Right? Or like, actually, I've been my own worst enemy and I've been sabotaging my own self and my own success for as long as I can remember now.
Yep.
And sometimes I think that is where those golden keys lie, is in that acceptance.
Definitely. Definitely. The other thing that's really interesting about it is like some of the lies have been like, they've been ones that I didn't even want to admit to myself because I wanted to be that kind of a person. It's like, I've wanted to show up as an unconditionally loving being in the world, but I'm not. And I had to have that mirrored to me repeatedly before I started to get, through my own thickness around it and really allow the truth to be that, you know what? I'm just as capable of hate as anyone. And there are things in people that I actually do feel a tremendous amount of nastiness toward. And I need to actually look at that nastiness and I need to go there, not even to understand it, but just to be honest with myself that it's there and it has to be dealt with. Again, self-inquiry. Here we are. What is this and who is this for?
Absolutely.
So it's like, and the wonderful thing about that is that there's been a great deal of liberation on my part that has happened, where I feel more free to feel what I feel and to not hide it, and to find appropriate ways to share it and reveal it. But I don't have to create a persona that's false in order to avoid it.
I love that that's been so liberating for you. And I can imagine that that's been a really beautiful component of life more recently over the last couple of years for you.
Yeah.
And I had a really, really resonant conversation last night with what we're talking about right now around, well, I'll say with someone in one of the communities I'm in that's a very conscious community. And we had this conversation around the fact that not everything's love and light. And a lot of people want to just look at all of these things. Oh, it's fine. It's good. It's great. It's all love and light. And like you said, you had this realization that you're not always this unconditionally loving person. And sometimes you do have this nastiness that's there.
Yeah.
And I think that it can be easy to bypass some of that less love and light experiences that exist. And recently I had an experience around this myself where there were some things that I had to say that were absolutely not love and light.
Yeah.
And that was my truth. And it was something that I needed to express. And I sat with it for a couple of days after, and I was like, ooh, like that isn't my normal me. That isn't my normal loving me. Like, was that wrong? Do I need to apologize for that? And I sat with it for a couple of days and I was like, you know what? No, although it wasn't the most kind and loving thing to say, it was what was so true for me. And I am not here to be sorry about the things that are true for me.
Yeah.
And it's just kind of coming back to this aspect of the divine mirror in entrepreneurship. You know, sometimes, like you said, you want things that really aren't it, that aren't actually the way
Yeah.
to step forwards, and that's hard. And sometimes you got to look at yourself really, really hard and deeply in that mirror and really recognize that that's not my truth. This is my truth.
Yeah.
And that's okay, whether it is all love and light or whether it's not. And taking that radical responsibility and being able to be with that, and still simultaneously having compassion for yourself
Yeah.
at the same time.
For me, being that love and light person was the bypass.
Yes.
Yeah, it was the bypass. It was there was absolutely nothing honest about that.
And oftentimes we see that. Like, I see that so often in the entrepreneurial communities, is people bypassing what's actually the right thing or the right way to look based off of what we see in society. And in reality, it's just holding them back and preventing them from being able to be in alignment.
Yeah. Yep. All of
So
those things.
yeah, and more, right? So this is what I like to refer to as looking at your shadows. Is really looking at these places that you might be bypassing, or looking at the ways you might be bypassing your own alignment, bypassing your own creativity, bypassing achieving your goals and your dreams. And my question to you is, and you're in your own experience and in what you see in your clients, why do people bypass these shadows, and why do people bypass this darkness?
By and large, it's a survival mechanism. We're programmed to survive. I mean, that's built into our DNA, you know. And one of the developmental things that we have as a part of our survival mechanism is the need to belong to other people and with other people. And one of the things that we learn early on, I mean, even before we're verbal, one of the things that we learn is, how can I get other people to respond to me favorably? How can I get what I need from these people? You know, and how can I please them without pushing them away? And that's the puzzle of the kid, you know. And like I said, most of the time, those lessons start before we even know how to use words. So that it develops early, and we learn how to show up in our circles in order for our people to not abandon us, right? Now, the thing that's really tricky is sometimes we do show up in those circles and we don't get what we need. We get shunned or abused or hurt or whatever. And that's, again, that's traumatic. And that also just helps create this crisis, an ongoing crisis of, how is it that I can be okay here? You know? So for me, I can speak from my experience here that the majority of the shame that I've experienced in my life, I think, has been rooted in being in a situation where I had one parent that was depressed, and I had another parent who was very self-critical, and I was insecure. I was just so insecure. And so a lot of the shame that I feel, and a lot of the belief that I had about myself, about my own base core of unworthiness, I think started there. And I can trace back, even in elementary school, times when I would defer to other people because I believed that they were better than me. and that they deserved it more than I did, so they can have it and I would just go without. So that pattern of self-sacrifice and of trying to show up in a way that pleased other people, that was in place by the time that I got to elementary school. And it just got more and more, perfected the older I got. So by the time that I was in my 30s, I didn't know who the hell I was. I didn't have any idea who I was, who I really was. And I had tried to fit in with my peers, and I had tried to fit in music, and I had tried to fit in at church, and I had tried to fit in all of these places. And I kept coming up with that I am not good enough, right? Now, the thing that's really interesting is that belief is not a statement of belief. That belief is a felt sense about myself. And it just kept coming up over and over and over again. And I went through a divorce and a severe breakup when I was in my early 30s. And that was really the first, that was really kind of, if there is a dark night experience, that was the first of mine. And I really had no idea who I was apart from those relationships and apart from those roles and apart from all of the different ways that I had been showing up. I had no idea who I was. Now, coincidentally, that was when my entrepreneurship journey started. It's been a journey of self-discovery from day one, But the thing that I would look at is that I hid these things even from myself because they were too painful to see and too painful to acknowledge and too painful to let in. But as a grown-up, I have different tools available to me than a 3 or 4 or 5-year-old kid. And even as a teenager, I didn't have the tools to work on this stuff. And as an adult, I've been fortunate to be introduced to some spiritual teachers and to some practices that have lit and eased my way through some very difficult acknowledgments and some very difficult things to accept about myself. But in doing that process and doing that work, an amazing liberation has happened, and it continues to happen, and it continues to unfold. And that shadow work is the stuff. Who wants to do that? Nobody wants to do that. It's horrible. It's painful. It's gross. It's nasty. And at some point it becomes necessary.
Totally. You get to the point where the reward is greater than the current experience, in my opinion, and is what drives you forward into that challenge, into that darkness, into that shadow.
I don't even know if it's a reward.
What exists on the other side? I like to think of it as a reward.
What I think is that I can finally live with myself and be okay. And that's really, really, really amazing.
It's a beautiful opportunity.
Yeah.
One of the things that I heard in what you were just sharing and in what you expressed earlier on in our conversation, you were talking about how you weren't super forthcoming with putting yourself in the room. You weren't super forthcoming with asking for collaborations or making any ask in general for sharing what it is that you're stepping into so that other people can actually see. Do you feel as though that particular shadow in your life has anything to do with your experience as a child and that timidness that you felt as a child?
I'm certain that there are roots there. I don't know how much of our childhood trauma we can continue to point at as a cause of anything. But at some point, we have to take responsibility for who we are. And that includes taking responsibility for our childhoods and just saying, you know what? I was at the mercy of people back then. But my responsibility now is to say, my childhood no longer determines my future.
That's good. That's a good one. Yeah, your childhood doesn't have to continue to play out in your future, in your current experience. You can choose to recognize, okay, that's where I learned that. And this is where I choose to do something different.
I'm going to let my dog finish barking and you can edit this out.
Okay.
It must be a delivery person. And just in case that there will be a doorbell ring, I'm going to let it. I think we're safe now.
Okay, cool.
You might want to re-encapsulate what you just said, because he started to bark right as you were getting to the meat of it.
Yes. Coming back. It's gone. That's okay.
I think you can still salvage some of what was there.
Yeah. Just talking about the concept of your childhood doesn't have to determine your present actions and your current choices. And one of the things I always go back to in working with myself and in working with my clients is reminding me and them, you always have a choice. Your childhood does not need to have power over your current experience. You can choose to take your power back, recognize, hey, that's where I learned this thing. That is where I started this particular pattern. And I can at any point in my journey choose to change that pattern, choose to change the direction in which I'm stepping, choose to change the path that I'm walking on.
Yeah.
And that is, in my opinion, where you really start to integrate that shadow, is choosing something different based off of the past and recognition of what you've learned as you step into a different choice.
Yeah. You have a much more big view of things. And as you were speaking, one of the things that came to my mind was it was a lot easier to forgive my parents after I became a parent. Because it's like all of a sudden you realize just how ill-prepared anybody is going to be for that role. And that my parents were 23 and 24 years old when I was born. And I look at that and I go, when I was 23 and 24 years old, I don't know what I would have done in that place, in that role.
I say that all the time. I'm 30 years old and I'm sitting here and I'm like, Mama, how the hell did you do that? Like,
isn't that right?
Oh my God. And I have so much honor for the people in my world that are currently parents.
Yeah.
Because, I feel like your 20s are this time where you're still learning who the heck you are in this world, what you like, how you want to show up.
Yeah.
And to simultaneously bring another life into that experience and take on that responsibility and that role of supporting them in their needs when you're still not even totally sure of yours.
Yeah.
It's like, wow, I bow to you. You're so impressive. So if you're a parent and you're listening to this, like, I honor you.
That's the thing. It's like life has a way of bringing those things around in a circular way. And if we're in any kind of level of awareness where we can see them, there's a grand opportunity there. I think for a lot of folks, they may not be conscious enough the first, second, third time that comes around to do anything with it. And I remember ultimately being able to go back to different times in my life when I felt bad about things that had happened, and to take a bigger perspective and look at really all of the things that were going on. Like that person who was abusive to me in 7th grade and pushed my head into the lockers, and that I got kicked out of school for beating up because he pushed my head into the locker. He was, he was a bully, but his dad was a bigger bully. And his dad was scary, man. His dad was like this unpredictable, angry, raging alcoholic man who could not allow anything that his kid did to be good enough. So being able to look at that as an adult gives me a whole different experience of that time. And I believe that our experiences that we can cultivate in our imagination are just as powerful as the experiences that we can cultivate here, here in the room. And all of those different things, all of those different places where I felt less than or vulnerable or hurt or abused or bullied, I could go back and have a bigger perspective of and work through and I could find healing around those things rather than carrying them around as a continued source of pain and trauma, and a continued source of reasons to not fully take responsibility for my life and live.
That's such a huge part of any journey, whether it's a spiritual journey, whether it's a healing journey, whether it is an entrepreneurial journey, is being able to look at the things that might be challenging, that might be causing you pain, the things that have really hurt, oftentimes with other people, right? It's easy to look at someone and be like, you hurt me. This hurt me.
Yeah.
And being able to take that observer role and take a step back and ask yourself, well, where did this person learn this? And there's some pretty likely chances that if they're causing you pain, there's someone or something that caused them pain. And that's where they learned that. And being able to recognize that it's not a you thing, right?
Not all the time. No. And not all the way, not 100% ever. We're in a fishbowl here with a whole bunch of other people, and everybody's got their own stuff that they bring. I've got mine, and I've certainly, I am not an innocent here. I've dealt out my own pain in my own ways to people. And I think a big part of the inquiry that I'm doing around that is taking responsibility for that stuff too.
We all have our own big backpack full of bricks that we collect over the years.
Isn't that right? It's a great metaphor.
Yeah. And you get to remember that everybody else has that too.
Yeah.
So a lot of what I'm hearing here is how your shadows have prevented you and ultimately sabotaged you from being able to be in alignment with your ability to get into a role, to speak your truth, to make connections. And I'm also hearing what happens when you're able to integrate this shadow, and when you're able to really look at it and welcome it and accept it and work with it, how you can then become the observer and step into a different choice that allows you to be in a more aligned space, that brings you more abundance, that brings you more love, that brings you more success, that brings you more joy and happiness in life.
Yeah.
And I'm curious how integrating this shadow and diving into this shadow work over the years has allowed you to step into more creativity.
That's a great question and a great direction to go. What's really funny is that I actually feel less creative than I felt before. because I feel like that my creativity before, you remember those crutches that I was telling you about?
Mhm.
My creativity was one of them. And what's really funny is like a lot of times when I was in the most pain, those were the times when I was the most creative. Right? It was just some way of working through whatever was coming up. It was a way of externalizing something that was going on the inside. So I'm sure that that could have been a pretty important part of my healing journey, but it was unconscious. But it was always the easy way out. It was also a way of not actually doing the serious work. It was a way of just kind of coping in the moment. So what's really funny is that my creative output during the times that I was actually more in those places of pain and shame and hurt and difficulty, the creativity flowed really easily at those times. And what's really funny now is like the creativity that I experience now is different. And it's coming from a place of responding rather than reacting. And and it's more how do I even talk about this? I think the biggest lesson that I've learned in entrepreneurship is that there's a gift coming through. And that gift actually isn't mine to give, but I'm a conduit for it. And it's not something that I can control, and it's not something that I can deny, but it's in response to the people that I interact with. And that's one of the things that I think is really a paradox about the whole thing, is that we keep hearing that we need to find out what our gifts are and go out and share them. Well, I was really putting a lot of effort into that for a very, very long time, and finding that it was not very fruitful, because what I thought my gifts were and what my gifts ended up being was kind of two different things. So the way that I am approaching creativity now is my motto in life is to show up, pay attention, and participate. And my creativity shows up in that, in a way that is responsive to the needs of the people who are there. And what I tell people is that your gift, you don't need to worry about, you don't need to worry about sharing your gift, because your gift is going to be invoked if you are available, if you are, you know, if you are in a place of clarity and availability. You don't need to worry about your gift. It will come through. It will be invoked by the situation in the room, right? So all you really have to do is show up and pay attention, deep attention to those around you, and then respond as you're led to respond. And that's all. And that's what creativity looks like now. So if I'm writing a song, oh, we're having another visit. Good boy, Vinny.
Get him.
So what I was saying is that that's what creativity looks like for me now. Um, I don't have to force it. I don't have to coerce it. I don't have to use willpower to make it happen. Um, and I'm growing and growing and growing in trust that it shows up when it needs to show up.
Something I'm hearing is that there's a big difference between choosing and driving yourself into creativity versus being present, being aware, being open, and allowing yourself to receive and be a conduit for whatever finds you, whatever comes through you, whatever moves through you,
Yeah.
and exists outwardly as you bring it to the world in the form of creativity.
It's a lot like what, um, I don't know if you're familiar with the prayer of Saint Francis.
I'm not.
I'm not going to say the whole thing, but the very first line in it is, "Make me an instrument of your peace." And the thing is that I'm just going to I'm going to close it off even further and say, make me an instrument. I don't care what comes through, but I trust that it's what's necessary in the moment, and I can be good with that, and I don't have to control any of it.
That full surrender.
Feels good, doesn't it?
It does. And it's not easy. It's sometimes truly hard, but leaning into that full surrender, like the beauty that comes through and the beauty that fills your heart in that full surrender, it goes against everything most people have ever been taught and allows you to just lean in and fully experience and fully express.
Yeah.
It's a beautiful place to be and a beautiful thing to experience.
For sure.
So in previous conversations, you and I have talked a good amount about the concept of will.
Yeah.
And I'd love for you to elaborate a little bit on how this concept of will is related to that ability to surrender, that ability to be this open conduit to whatever moves through you.
Well, will has been something that I have been interested in understanding for quite a while, but it's really come into much more clear focus in the last couple of years. And it kind of part of the drive to understand it was personal, coming from my own experience, because there were areas where I knew I was stuck, but I could not find a way to get myself out of them. And it's like everybody that I would talk to about it would just say, "Oh, you just got to push through it," or "You just got to do this and that and the other thing." And I would do this, that, and the other thing, and I would still be just absolutely stuck. And then there were certain patterns in my life that I was really frustrated with, because I knew that I needed to change them, but I didn't. All of the things that I tried seemed to be futile. And so I was wondering, what is going on with my will? Is there something wrong with my will that won't allow this to move, or that won't be effective in making the change that I want to make? And I had seen that come up in probably 3 clients of mine, where they had invested years of time and a lot of money into creating a business, only to reach a point where there was a non-negotiable thing that they would not do. And they put the whole thing aside and abandoned it. And I was just scratching my head, because that was something that they said that they wanted with all their heart. And they had demonstrated a pretty sustained commitment to the thing, until it got to that one Achilles heel that they could not get past. And I was just very curious about it. So one of the things that I just started to look at was, what is human will, and how does it work? What's going on here? And it has been a fascinating journey. It's certainly not an argument about free will. That's a whole different animal. And that's all about theology and philosophy, and that's not what we're talking about here. But there's a universal quality that all humans have, and that is that we all have some agency when it comes to the decisions that are made, and the way that we, move, and the things that we do and the places that we go. We seem to have the ability to make decisions in those in those areas. I wanted to understand that better. Now, I'm going to tell you that I'm 2 years in and it's more mysterious than it is actually clear, because it has led to, is this thing here that I call myself, does it have any ability to really think and act separately from the source of things? And I haven't found a yes or no answer to that question. And I'm still exploring it. But the fascination is, it has started to matter a lot less to me. And it has actually been a place where I could find some of those shadow things and really look at them. Like, what is this thing that keeps me from asserting myself when I have a legitimate thing to offer and I just withhold it? What's going on there? And it's like, why can't I will myself to do that? And that has been a very revealing thing. It's like, and again, I don't have a lot of answers that I can articulate, but what I can tell you is that will, to me, I think we are powerful, powerful, powerful beings. But there's a paradox about that power when we are actually out of the way. Much more powerful things are allowed to happen. And so that has been the experience that I've been looking at and seeing and saying, okay, so willpower and effort, certainly there are times when willpower and effort, I'm going to encourage people to try them because they just might work. And then there are other times when the willpower and the effort are actually going to lead to futility and frustration, and you're going to end up being at a dead end, and you're still going to have to surrender. So why don't you just go ahead and start with surrender? And just say, I am available and open and waiting to know what my next step is. And what's really interesting is that there's not a separate being that comes from. There's not a separate outside of yourself place that comes from. It all still comes from within your own consciousness. But for right now, it is hidden in your consciousness, and we're just waiting for it to be made known.
That was deep and juicy, and I loved it.
Good. So
Yeah,
where did that take you?
kind of brings me back to that whole aspect of like being present and being open and being aware.
Yeah.
And if you aren't, it's difficult to truly find that alignment. It's like it often comes when you're not like really, really looking for it.
Yeah.
And it also brings up this concept of oftentimes the answers lie in the questions. And I know that I'm very guilty of often asking questions and feeling like I need an answer. But sometimes and oftentimes, not needing an answer and being able to just live with the question is what brings you that clarity and
great?
Understanding. Yeah.
Yeah. Another paradox, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I have a little sticky note on my wall in my bathroom that I say every morning that always reminds me to be with the questions without needing to seek an answer.
The thing that I keep finding over and over and over and over again is this place of paradox is it's an important place to reach over and over and over again. I'm not going to say that it's pleasant, because it's honestly, it's like If I'm uncertain about stuff and I'm insecure about stuff, reaching a place of paradox doesn't do anything to relieve that. But if I can get to that place of paradox and just say, oh, I see what's happening now. I can be insecure for a little while longer, or I can be uncertain for a little while longer. But there's something shaking out here that I'm not ready for yet, and I just have to wait. And when I see the paradox, when I reach that place of paradox and recognize it, okay, I've reached a place of waiting.
Yeah. I'm laughing because I was having a conversation with one of my best friends this week who is, if anyone here is familiar with astrology, she is a Taurus sun, a Taurus moon, and a Taurus rising.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah, she is a Taurus. And she has that strong bull energy to her. And we were having this conversation where she was just like, Leah, like, I'm done. I'm just, I'm done. And I'm just neutral right now. And we were laughing because I was like, you're neutral for now until you decide to rear your head through that wall like a freaking bull. Right. And comes into what you're talking about here, where it's like, sometimes it's a matter of just like being with what is until that moment arrives where you're like, all right, it's time to take action. It's time to make a change, and it's time to transmute this thing that I've been sitting with for so long now into something different.
It'll be clear. It'll be clear. And it actually might be a lot less fantastic than you thought it might be, but it'll be clear. Yeah.
And sometimes a lot easier than you thought it might be too.
Very often.
And that kind of comes into that aspect of waiting and being until it moves through you.
Yeah.
Because oftentimes when you try to force yourself into it, you'll likely face resistance that might not be there if you actually waited until that moment where you feel the call and you're like, okay, it's time.
Yeah. I don't know. Have you ever tried to untie a knot in a shoelace?
Of course.
If you strain to untie the knot, it usually makes the knot tighter. But one of the things that's really interesting is that if you just kind of hold the knot gently between your fingers and roll it around a little bit, it'll start to loosen. And you don't even have to put very much force on your grip. It's just like you just roll it around between your fingers and just let it loosen. And I find that those times, it's like if I can get into that same kind of a state where I'm just, letting things be and letting things roll and letting things loosen, that everything will be okay.
I love that analogy, and it brings me to a really beautiful self-reflective question that I have for our listener today is, where is the knot in your life right now? And how are you trying to untangle it? How are you trying to unravel it? Are you forcing it and pulling on it and picking at it? Or are you allowing it to roll around and using ease to create an open space, really? And where can you bring more ease into creating that open space?
That's a great place to go.
I like it.
Yeah, totally.
Oh, Franklin, you are such a wonderful human, and it has been such a pleasure connecting with you. Every conversation you and I have had has been just so enlivening and enlightening, and has led me to walk away with really beautiful things to think about. And I'm very grateful for that.
I have been equally blessed. Thank you, Leah.
Yeah, thank you for being here with me today, Franklin, and for sharing some of your wisdom and experience, for sharing some of your life journey with us. And if anyone is interested in learning more about you or finding you, where can they do that?
FranklinTaggart.com is my blog, the home of my podcast, and my permanent address. So as long as I am alive, it will be the place where I can be found. I'm also on pretty much every social, active on only a couple of them, but And I have a podcast called Franklin Taggart's Virtual Coffee Break and Unconventional Life School. You can find that on the blog as well.
Amazing. And I will put all of that info in the show notes for you so that you can easily go and hang out with Franklin because he's such an awesome dude. Franklin, I'm so grateful for you. Thank you so much. Much love.
And same to you, Leah. Thank you.
Bye, everyone. See you next time.
Bye now.